welcome to Moon Mother Magic. I am your host, Ariel Myers. Today I have on my friend and an amazingly gifted empath, intuitive channel, Veronica Channel. I have been seeing Veronica personally for 8 years. She has inspired so much of my work. She has kind of given me the trust in myself to really trust my own gifts that I've really needed to move forward on this journey of sharing fertility work. Veronica was generous enough to share a collective message from the spirit guides about fertility in general, what fertility can mean and how it can support our lives. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I'm realizing that the last probably few years worth of calls we have were just audio calls. So I think this is the first time I've seen you in like 5 years.
Yeah, just crazy.
So I was thinking about when I was thinking about well, how will I introduce you? I realized that in the introduction, there are going to have to be questions so that I make sure that I'm using the accurate, the right words and descriptions, because I realize I know how I think of you, but that might not be how you think of or describe yourself or what you do. So let's kind of have a kind of back and forth. So
yeah,
to the listener, sorry, go ahead. Do you want to?
I was thinking about that too, because my chronic problem, all the years that I have been doing anything in this world, has been the struggle has been to figure out what it is that I actually do. And where I fall on that spectrum of what people understand this kind of work to be, and me often saying okay, well, it kind of is that, but it's not.
Yeah.
And it kind of is this, but it's not. And it's kind of this, but it's not. It's not what you think of it at all.
So. Well, exactly. I was totally just thinking about that in terms of something about myself. I was you can say how people will perceive something that this is not that, but then what is it? And sometimes that naming of what it is in trying to get it to fit into something, it's its own thing. So even just talking about it, we're going around. So I will say that when I think about you or talk about you, well, so Veronica has been who I consider to be an intuitive or a channel or a medium or someone who connects with spirit guides. Would any of that sound close-ish?
Yes. So I usually gravitate towards absolutely the things that are consistent is channeling, absolutely, spirit guides, absolutely. I tend to shy away from calling myself a medium only because, again, people's expectations immediately jump to you're talking to people who have passed, which sometimes happens. But that's not usually where I go to, and it's not usually what happens to me unless it's really necessary or I'm looking for it. Right. So I usually don't say that just because I want to make that distinction between people who are really looking for that experience. I always feel like they should go to someone who that is their specialty, that's what they do. So I would call myself more in the direction of an empathic individual, an intuitive spiritual channel. That type of thing is always consistent, but what I do with it tends to be a little bit different than what people would assume from what a medium does, or even, I don't even love the word psychic, because I think that also brings up a whole bunch of interpretation that is not really useful for what actually goes on.
Yeah. So I was thinking when I first met you, it was probably 7 or 8 or even 9 years ago. I'm trying to remember. I remember that I had a patient at the second iteration of my apothecary. So that would have happened in 2012. So sometime after 2012. So less than 10 years. And you were working for or an assistant of another healer. Right. But I feel even when I met you, you were, I guess I'm curious about like when you began working there, did you know that you had this talent or skill or ability, or did it kind of arise as you were there?
Well, yes and no to both, both of those scenarios. I've known since I was very, very young that there was something, that there
Mhm.
was an affinity for this kind of thing, and there was a desire for it. My dad is actually a medium, or that's work that he's
Ah.
done. He never did it really professionally, but he did do it through a spirituals church for a lot of years, and he does have the talent. So I grew up with that concept being something that was very, very normal. Like the idea that my
Mm.
dad could talk to spirits was like, okay, sure. Like, and I remember being very young, and I can't formulate exactly when in that youngness that this thought started arising, but being very young, probably before I was even in school, and thinking to myself that, well, my dad can talk to spirits, and so if he can do it, I can do it. And
Mm.
so from a very young age, I was like waiting for it. I wanted to be able to
Mm.
do what he could do. And so I was looking for it, everywhere. And as a little kid, you always expect like, ghosts or spirits are going to appear the way they do in the movies, and that it's going to be like this or it's going to be like that, like the way that's always dramatized. Um, and that never happened, but my interest was there. Like, and I'm one of four siblings. Nobody else in my family really had any interest
Mm.
whatsoever. It was just me that was like hyper focused. And my mom's very interested in a lot of that too. So she was the one who kind of got me associated with as many people as possible when I was growing up, to be able to kind of figure it out for myself. So I was around a lot of, spiritual readers and energy workers and things like that. So I kind of learned a lot baseline from osmosis, like just from being
Mm.
around people. As you learn a lot and you hear a lot and you get to participate. So I got to participate in meditations, I got to have energy work done, and actually realize that I could feel it. Like it wasn't
Mm.
something that was made up, is like I was feeling things. And so my early childhood was a lot of these sort of random experiences where I would go to that type of group meditation and have this really, interesting experience that not everybody else was having, or that I would, go to an energy healer. And it happened over and over again, probably from the age of around 11 to 13 or 14, where anywhere that I went where there was someone who was sensitive or intuitive or whatever, is usually by, the end of the whatever reason I was there, is they would gravitate towards me and they would get this look in their eyes and they would say, "Do you realize what you're
Mm.
able to do?" And
Huh.
I would be like, "No, but I'm really hoping you're going to tell me." Like I was just reaching for anything. And it was the same period of time that I was like teaching myself to read tarot cards and
Mm.
crystals, and attempting to use a pendulum. Pendulums have never worked for me. It's been one of the biggest frustrating things in my life, is I cannot make them work. They're
Mhm.
not my thing. But I was exploring everything. I was, reading every book that I could read, and, practicing everything that anyone taught me as I was messing with it. And that's really the only way I can describe it, is I didn't have any clear teaching. I was just messing with it.
Mm.
And my relationship with my dad has never been a really good one. So this topic was something that, was never really comfortable for me to just go and ask him anything about, because we just were not good at talking it to each other. So I was really kind of just doing it on my own. And again, having this vague reference from other people saying, "You're so gifted in this," or "You definitely have this skill," or "You definitely have this talent," but no real clear definition of what to do. So here I am just messing with it through my teenage years, and into college as well. Not a whole lot really went in any particular direction, but in college, I discovered yoga, or yoga discovered me. And that was something that really started to ground my experiences a little bit more, where before everything would happen kind of very much out of my control. I started to have a little bit more feeling that I could actually navigate when something was happening. Still
Mhm.
was not able to, say what I was doing or not doing, but at least I had like a concept of what it felt like to navigate myself. Like I was getting clear on me during those years. So a lot of yoga, a lot of meditation, kind of led me to where now I graduate college. I'm back home with my parents, trying to decide if I'm going to graduate school. And I am directed to the healer, Carl, who I was working with when I met you. And that was, it was supposed to be, I was supposed to be working for him very part-time, just whenever the other person he had wasn't available. And from his tellings, he says that the first day that he met me, that he almost wasn't going to hire me because he was like, I don't know, there was something,
Huh.
between us that he was like, I was like, nah, I don't know. And then he had a second thought and was like, no, give her a try. And,
Huh.
you know, almost 12 years later, working for him is, we call that's how the universe arranges things for us. It's smarter than
Mhm.
we are. But through working with him is when I started to understand my way of doing things. And that I think was a really important distinction, because my whole life I was expecting that whatever was going to happen for me was going to look like what my dad did. So it was completely negating the reality that this connection to what we call spirit or what we call source or what we call energy is completely unique every single time. Even if
Mm.
you have 30 people in a room who all call themselves mediums, each one of them has a very individual personal connection. They don't all do it the same way. And that was something that I don't think I understood at that
Mm.
point. So while I was working with Carl is what started happening, and again, not by design, by complete accident, is I would start to get a lot of really random sensations. A lot of random pain would happen only when people were coming in.
Huh.
And I didn't know what the heck it was. It just was weird to me that I was like, oh, it's so weird that, I get a headache like right before this person's coming in, or I have a stomach ache, or this happens or that happens, when I felt fine, all day prior, and I feel fine once they leave. So
Mm.
finally
Wow.
I started to notice, because I was paying attention, that I would notice things like someone would come in and I would have this like suddenly a pain in my stomach, or something like that. And he would say in the session, like, oh, your biggest issue is your stomach.
Huh.
And my brain would go, well, that's weird. Or, I'd have a random pain somewhere and he'd be like, oh yeah, you have this issue going on like right in this spot where I have the pain. And I'm like,
Hmm.
oh,
Wow.
that's weird. So I finally said something to him about it and he was like, oh, he's like, you're probably a medical intuitive. I'm like, well, what the
Huh.
heck is that? Like, I had never heard of it before. So the benefit of having no formal education is that there's so many things that I just had no idea what the options were. No idea. So that started, I was like, well, that's not what I asked for. Like, that's not what I wanted at all. Like, I wanted to be able to
Right.
talk to spirits. So why do I just get like the random headaches? Like, that seems like a stupid skill to have. If you're picking your superhero skills, like who would pick that? But once I had a concept of what it was, then I could actually focus on it. And
Mm.
through focusing on it, and again, and that's where yoga and meditation really helped, the ability to like actually observe and again, navigate or relate to internal sensations and experiences. So once I started paying attention to it, I realized I could actually like almost turn the volume up on it. So those random
Interesting.
sensations were now
Yeah.
something I could tap into. And before anyone even said what their problem was, is I was looking for, I'm like, okay, if I can feel the echo of what you're feeling, let's see if I can feel it before you tell me. So
Hmm.
I started playing with it and finding that like, yeah, I could essentially say their body feels like this, and this, and it would be reflected, almost very often, almost exactly in what they had written down on their intake forms or where they said their issues were. And once Carl knew that this was a thing, is he helped me fool around with it, where he would like call me. So I wasn't even in the room with someone, and he would say, hey, I'm working on so-and-so. What do you feel?
Yeah, I love when
I'd
he
be
does
like,
that.
I don't know, this,
So
that, and the
weird.
other thing. And he would say, huh, that's exactly what I found, or that's exactly what they complain about.
Huh.
So, I started learning from that point what it meant to be empathic, right?
Yeah.
So that's why that's one of those terms that I use, because it's consistent, that pretty much everything that I intuit is I'm doing it in an empathic way, which to me
Hmm.
just means that I feel it more than I hear it, or more than I see it, or more than I know it.
Right.
Often it's a combination of all of those things. So I can have a sense of the way something looks or the way something, is being told to me, but generally is I'm reading people a lot on an emotional level. So that the empathicness of it is, I almost feel like when I'm with you is that whatever your experience is I am feeling it to some extent as though it's my own.
Hmm.
Um,
So when you're feeling it, can you also, and I'm just asking you this because you've kind of done this with me before, is like, can you also then have an understanding of the factors that are leading to it? Like the, almost like the
yeah.
things that came before the illness or the disease?
Usually,
Valid.
yes. And that's where the sort of progression of everything started to go,
Mhm.
is the more I was paying attention to the sensations themselves, the more other information started showing up. And it would be, little bits of like flashes of an impression, or just like a random word or something that enters into your mind and you're like, I
Mhm.
know it's this.
Yeah.
So it'd be like, oh, a stomach ache. It's like, what did you eat? You had this. Or it's not actually your stomach, it's your intestines because of, blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
And then, the guidance started coming a little bit more where again, that feeling that the words are actually showing up in your head, or that someone's whispering them in your ear, that's more of
Mhm.
that sort of
Yeah,
channeling.
that's what I was going to ask you, like, because you've said a lot of it, that it feels like it's something that you're accessing inside of yourself, like you're feeling it inside of yourself. But when when I've had a reading with you and you've like almost like called in whoever is there to come, like Seth, or I've had Uriel or
Yeah.
archangels, and I think I even had Kuan Yin, right? Like it's like, so does that feel like it's like a whisper, you said, in your ear? Does it seem like someone outside of yourself or next to you, or
Yeah.
that
So
kind
here
of
again,
feeling?
this is my perspective on it. And I
Mhm.
don't know for other people who do a similar kind of thing or call themselves a similar type of thing. All of that sort of medical intuitive thing was the stepping stone for me learning how to do the channeling thing. So like I said, a lot of the beginning information was coming, like it was just arising from within. And like I said, random flashes of information, or again, like a voice in my head saying it's this.
Mhm.
And not really knowing exactly where that voice was coming from, but being like, okay, like someone's telling me that it's this. And I had had that experience before of having like a voice in your ear, or someone, talking to you, but not a clear sense of who it was. But through, actually through Carl, is I started the process of learning how to channel, because I met Trish, who is another channeler who I know,
Mhm.
or you've heard of at least. And she was the first person who I had ever seen who did channeling the way that she did it, or the way that she does it. I had never seen anybody do it that way before. And something in me kind of went, oh, that's it. Like, I want to be able to do that. Like, that's the thing that I want to be able to do. I'm like, whatever about the medical intuitive thing, like, I want to be able to do that. Um, so I started trying to learn how to do things that way. And it's, a whole, longer story about getting there. But once I had figured it out, is for me, that process of channeling, still, it feels like it's an outside source, but the outside source is running through me. So
Mhm.
from my experience, when I sit down with someone to start channeling for them or on their behalf or whatever, is I actually try and empty. Like I imagine that everything that is me, my individual consciousness or my individual thought patterns and all of that, just sort of empties out.
Mm.
And into that space, I feel presence. So it's actually like that whoever is speaking, sometimes I can actually feel them like standing behind me, or wherever they are in space, but the actual awareness of them is all in here. It's like
Mm.
they're standing in me, so that as I'm talking, it's me talking, but it's them expressing. So
Mhm.
often the words that I'm using are specific because they're telling me to say it in a very specific way, or they are saying things in a very specific way. And if I get it wrong because I interject or whatever, often they'll stop me and be like, no, not that word. Go back and say it this way, because
Mhm.
often the language is super important for the person who's hearing it to really understand the meaning, right? Because certain words don't make sense to people the same way, or the way that you say it can be, I don't know, it can obscure the meaning for a lot of people. So,
Mhm.
but the feeling is still that whatever that outside source is actually like literally moving itself through me. So I feel almost like we're, standing on top of each other at that point.
Yeah, it's so interesting to be on the receiving end of it, because I have like all of the recordings of, we record the sessions, and like in each one, it's like, depending on who's coming in, you're either talking really fast or much more slowly or much more like stilted kind of. And then you, like the voice of you that I know, will often like say something and then like explain it in your voice a little bit. And
Yep.
I notice you going back and forth. And I can actually even tell just in talking to you, like when you're in that mode and then when you're just in your own mode. So it's interesting to listen to.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I've heard that multiple times there that some
Mhm.
people are like, oh my God, your voice actually changed, or, your
Mhm.
cadence changes,
Yeah.
your, whatever. But I'm present the whole time. I know
Yeah.
some people who do channeling are actually like, they're
Right, like
gone.
in a
They're in
trance or
whatever
something.
trance or whatever that
Mhm.
they're in. So I'm present the whole time. And I've kind of, again, learned in the beginning, there was none of that like back and forth. It was just, if I was in it, I was in it. And there was no, there was no getting out of it.
Mhm.
And now I feel like I've kind of gotten used to the experience enough where I can almost have that perspective running in the background.
Mm.
And that's how I describe it, because I have a lot of conversations with people that are not formal sessions, and often I'm still giving, somewhat channeled or intuitive guidance in those conversations, but I'm not trying to make it a channeling session. So it's like I
Right.
still feel the same thing, or I still hear the same thing, but
Mhm.
I'm running it in the background so that it can come out again in a more natural, like my normal conversational
Yeah,
way.
I was actually going to ask you that. Like, do you feel like you need to set boundaries around it? Like, is it always available to you, or is there ever like a block that you can't access it? So kind of like both things. Like, do you ever sit with someone and just not get anything, or do you ever just like have a friend that you meet out and you're like this
All
is
of the above. All of the above. I've only had, because it's one of my biggest fears, that when I first started doing this kind of work with people who weren't just like friends
Mhm.
or close acquaintances or something, is my greatest fear was that I was going to sit down with someone and there was going to be nothing, like,
Mhm.
and they were, in my mind, it was going to go the direction of like, old medieval Europe, where they're going to be like throwing stones at me, or it's going to
Mhm.
be the end of the world, because they're like, you're a charlatan, like you're not
Yeah.
real, and all of that self-doubt type of stuff. Um, and gratefully, that's only ever happened to me once,
Mm.
where I sat down with someone and I was trying, but it was so hard. There was such a block.
Interesting.
And I tried to fight through it, and it just wasn't working very well. And she knew it and I knew it. And so we stopped pretty quickly. And I was like, I'm really sorry. Like, I don't know what to do about this, because I was still very early in, doing this. So I was like, I don't even know what to say. Like, this has never happened to me before. Like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm sorry. And, of course I didn't charge her for anything.
Yeah.
Um, but what was interesting in that session is that she said to me afterwards, she's like, this is really typical. She's like, nobody can read me.
Huh.
And I was
Interesting.
like, oh, okay. Well, at least I feel a little better that this isn't like unique. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
like the only one who's never, been able to do this.
Yeah.
But she said that the only time she had like a successful like reading experience was someone who only did phone sessions, because I think they lived like across the country or something.
Mm.
And she had a session with them, and she said they were scarily accurate, and like it scared her. So in my
Maybe
mind, of
put up a
course,
block.
talking to some of my guides afterwards, I'm like, oh, okay, so you've got a thing where you like not to be readable.
Hmm.
Because if someone is able to get too deep, it's going to scare you,
Right.
so whatever that was the only time I've had that specific experience where nothing has happened. The only other time that I've had issues where it was really difficult channeling was when I was pregnant.
Oh,
And in the
interesting. Mm.
first trimester. So I don't even remember if it lasted the whole first 3 months, but somewhere in that range is they shut me down.
Huh.
It wasn't that like I couldn't fight through it, but it was so hard to connect, and it was so hard. Nothing felt easy. Nothing felt like it
Right.
normally did. And I finally was like, what the hell? Like, why is this so hard? And they were like, because dummy, like you need more energy to do something else right now. They're like, you
Yeah.
cannot do both. Like you
Yeah.
can't do both successfully.
Huh.
So they're like, we're making sure that you don't do both. So I had to
Wow.
like take a little break when I was pregnant. And they said, don't worry, it'll be fine. And, in another month or two, you'll be back to doing whatever you want to do. But
Right.
they're like, right now, you cannot do both.
Yeah. So it does
So,
feel like energy moving through, like you're using your energy to
oh,
move
yeah.
through you. Yeah. Do you get
Yeah, for
tired
sure.
after a reading?
Not like I used to. When I used to crash afterwards,
Mm,
as I would feel like really energized and great, usually right afterwards. But by the end of that day, I would be like falling asleep at 9 o'clock or even earlier,
yeah.
like I would be exhausted.
Huh.
Again, I think with experience and getting used to that kind of shifting of vibration, because that's really what you're doing, is you're just running different vibration through your energy fields, through your energy
Mm,
circuits. Is I don't get tired the way that I used to, but I still will be more fatigued on days that I'm doing readings than on days when I'm not. And I definitely feel it if I have consecutive days where I'm doing a
mm,
lot of energy work. By the end of that week, I'll be tired and need like a day where I really
yeah.
decompress. Um, I'm trying to remember what the other part of that question was.
Mm. I don't know, but I have another question. My other
Oh,
question is about
boundaries.
boundaries. Yeah.
Boundaries was the thing. So yes, absolutely,
Oh, and this
boundaries.
this other so I'm gonna boundaries, and then also, do you ever choose during a reading? Because this is kind of also boundaries, but the other direction. Like, do you ever choose not to share? Like, do you always trust that the information is information that the person does need to hear, or do you ever feel like, oh no, I'm not gonna say that? So
That's
both
that's a really
directions.
that's a very interesting conversation. So numbers, and I think you'll like my answer to that one. But the number one, boundaries, yeah, that has been one of the big, I think, reality changing things of my life, is comprehending what boundaries are.
Mm,
So one of the challenges of being empathic is that you typically, when you are naturally that way, like you're born that way, is you're not good at differentiating what is your natural feelings and what is something that you're picking up from someone else or from the environment or whatever.
right.
So my perspective is, I think I went through most of my young life being a complete sponge for
Mm.
the emotional energy of whoever was around me. And there was, a good amount of dysfunction in my house growing up. So I was super emotional like a lot of the time, and just thought, as I got older, that I'm like, okay, like I'm the crazy one, that I just have all of this emotional stuff and I have no idea what to do with it. And I don't know why
That's
it doesn't go
familiar.
away. And I
Yeah.
don't know why it's like all over the place and I can be fine and then I'm not fine. And, like the, all of that kind of feeling, saying, I just don't understand, but I guess it's me.
Mhm.
Um, so once I started to like figure out what it means to be empathic, and that I don't have that obvious boundary of what's yours and what's mine, and that my instinct, I think from very young, was to try and deal with other people's emotional stuff. Like my instinct is to help, like that's just what I do. So when I'm around people who are struggling, it's like I have to stop myself from intervening.
Mhm.
um, so on that emotional level, I think I was doing that all along, as whenever I was around someone having a hard time, is I was like trying to absorb it for them so that they would feel better.
Yeah.
And it took a while for me to really understand how problematic that was. Because part of me went right to being like, that's a great way to be, like, that's so that's so
So supportive of
generous.
people.
And then I eventually realized that no, it's kind of, you turn yourself into a martyr, and it's not functional, like it's not healthy, and
Right.
it's not it doesn't make anything work
This is
better.
really good advice for all of the empaths out there, because I have a feeling that a lot of women, I mean, I think mostly women are going to be listening, but I think a lot of women are empathic, and whether or not they're like aware of being empaths, I
Hmm.
do think we tend to be empathic, and or
Yeah.
empathetic. Is that the word?
Yeah, and I
Empathic.
think we're
Yeah.
trained to be that way too. We're
Hmm.
we're absolutely, as women, we're encouraged to take on that role, and to assume that if you feel something for someone or about someone, that you're supposed to help them, you're supposed
Hmm.
to alleviate it, you're supposed to step into that role. And what I've learned through doing this kind of work is that no, you're not, because
Mhm.
the work that is someone else's is always someone else's. It doesn't matter how much you want to try and change it for them. You can't. And it
Mm.
doesn't matter how much you think that feeling deeply with them is going to make it easier for them. It doesn't. It makes you hurt more while they hurt exactly the same. So it actually makes you less accessible. It makes you less able to really help them see what's going on because you've put yourself completely in the same situation that they're in. And then we get stuck there and we say that we're doing it for love. And usually we are from some places. We love the people that we're around. And so we're trying to help them. But what it ends up doing is it just keeps both people or both individuals stuck at the same place, and it doesn't create an opportunity for anything to be resolved.
I was
So
kind
that
of
was a big
chuckling
one for
because I
me,
was
and
like, I
one
think
that
that's
my
me.
own guides like fought me on for a long time, where they're like, you have to stop doing this.
Yeah, I mean, that was just good for me to hear. I was like, was that message for me specifically?
I think it's for all human beings,
I
but
agree. Yeah.
especially for people who are in any type of role that is caretaking or that they would consider healing, or where
Mhm.
they are just that type of personality where they really want to make things better, is that there's a need to know where there's the work that you can do and where it's somebody else's responsibility to take up the work that is theirs. And there's no amount of you trying that is going to make that happen faster or better. Again, you can be supportive to those people, you can offer them every opportunity, you can, be by their side, and you can do everything that you can do, but being miserable doesn't make them
Right,
any less
right.
miserable.
Yeah. And especially like in the beginning of my career as a healer, um, it would really pain me when I like couldn't help someone and or like couldn't take it on and couldn't do enough. And then it kind of came to me that like this is their karma. Like if I take it away or even try to take it away for them, like A, it's not going to work, but B, like for me to recognize that this is actually their lesson that they need to fulfill or somehow heal or understand for them to kind of move forward is how it helped me to see it. So I
Yeah.
don't know if you have like the same kind of perspective on it, but that was actually really, really helpful for me as like an
Yeah.
early
No,
young healer.
absolutely. And I definitely think that the kind of work that I do is always geared towards, which is why this is one of the reasons why I don't like the term psychic, because that implies that you know what's going to happen for
Mm,
someone, or that you somehow have like access to this secret information about the future. And that's not really how it works, is that you're always I say it's kind of like you're always looking at it like the cosmic GPS, is that when I'm with someone and they're asking whatever questions or whatever their issues are, is what I'm picking up or what is being channeled to me is like, well, here's where you are. And
mm,
here's maybe some information about how you got here. And if you continue this way, this is what it's going to look like. So this is what needs to change if you want things to go a different way. So if you want to go this other direction, like here's what needs to change. But
mm,
it's not so much about like, here's predicting what's going to happen for you. It's giving you a perspective on here's how you got here. And this is what needs to fundamentally be understood to affect the outcome, right? Because there's
mm.
always multiple opportunities that could happen or couldn't happen. Sometimes things are really big and there's like a whoa, you really need to change something now, otherwise this is happening, or this is
Mhm.
happening and you're not getting out of it because it's, karmically necessary or whatever. Occasionally that's true.
Mm.
But most of the time it's more in that sort of perspective of like, here's where you are, and this is how, I can give you the perspective that lets you decide for yourself where your future is going, because that's not my job, is
Right.
to decide where your future is going, or to tell you that this is what you should do with your life or not do with your life, because that is entirely up to you. And if I took that away from you, then what would you be getting out of this whole experience?
Right.
Like it doesn't make any sense. And that's where I think there's another one of those boundaries when you're doing any of this kind of healing work or working with spiritual energies, is being really clear on when it's someone else's responsibility to pick up and do their thing. Because it's
Mhm.
very easy for people to get addicted to or to rely on that outside voice that they trust more than their own, to say like, oh, well, I'll do it if Veronica tells me to, or I'll do it if my guides tell me to. but they won't take the chance on their own, or they won't make the decision on their own without that
Right.
reinforcement.
Yeah.
And that becomes an impediment to them. That becomes a real problem, in their development of their relationship with their self and the way that their life goes.
Hmm.
So as I've gotten, a little bit more mature in what I do, is I've gotten more clear on when I have to back off from people, or start to not answer calls so quickly, and, like, encourage them to go find other people or other solutions,
Hmm.
or, say like, hey, it hasn't been that long since your last session, like, call me again in a month or two if you still have these
Yeah.
questions. Like,
Do you feel like what you're sharing with people is something that if they were open to it, they could access themselves? Like, do you feel like you're tapping into what is in their field of aware, like knowing if like, I know I'm not like wording that this well, but you said it's just a vibratory kind of shift. So do you feel like everybody, if they were able to like open themselves, would be able to access this, or do you feel like it's really like you're getting it for them, but they would never kind of get to that themselves? Does that make sense?
yeah, that does make sense. I would say that every single person has the ability to access something. They have the ability to access their own intuitive knowing of what is right for their life. So it's like your own karma, your own soul is not hidden from you. It's
Mhm.
not like I have access to it, but you don't. It's built into your DNA. It's built into every, piece of what this embodiment is. There's really no distinction, right? We think of the soul as being something that's like way out there in some abstract space, but it's not. It's what's running through this all the time. It's what created this. So you have access to it 24/7. The question is if your mental, like mind space, is attuned well enough to it, where you are willing to hear it and perceive it and respect it as something that is just as real as what comes to you from this external experience. And that's where we have the tricky thing, is that not everybody is attuned in the same way naturally.
Mhm.
And some people will feel that experience to varying degrees. So like I said, I feel like I'm my doors and windows and everything are like wide open all the time, and have been kind of from the beginning. So I take for granted almost how easy it is for me to get sucked into or fall into that experience. I don't have to try as hard as a lot of other people do. Um, and that doesn't mean anything. The amount of trying that's necessary just has to do with what you are currently attuned to, but that's changeable. So I think everybody has the ability to access that same realm of information, but again, how they do it is going to be so unique to who they are and the way that they need to experience. Not everyone is going to hear it in a channeled way, like they're going to feel it a different way. Not everyone's going to
Mhm.
feel it empathically, like feelings. They're going to experience it however they experience it. And sometimes it might always come from that external, kind of source, where it's still you being united with that source energy, but maybe it always comes to you through outside symbols, or it always comes to you through an
Mhm.
outside voice, but it's still you drawing it to you. It's
Mhm.
not the other people like seeking you out and being like, I have to tell you this. It's you pulling those people to you
Hmm.
because you need to hear
Interesting.
it. So, that interconnectedness of individuals with spirit, or with that underlying, energy, call it God or call it whatever you want to call it. Um, that's everybody has access to that.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter if you're, and I like this, that spirit has said this to me too, that it doesn't matter if you're a nice person or not a nice person, like it doesn't change that relationship at all.
Hmm.
Is that the ability is still yours, and it's what you choose to do with it that determines whether you have a positive impact or a negative impact on
Yeah.
what's around you. But there's no judgment system or hierarchy of like certain people get to have this and certain people don't. It's simply a matter of how you've built your attunement, and somewhat to how important it is in your life experience to have that.
Hmm.
Some people, it doesn't work in their life experience. They don't want it.
Right.
And so if that's the case, then great. Like there's no amount of like real training or experience or anything that's going to outweigh that. And people who really, really want it, but it's hard for them to access, well, they'll get somewhere. And that difficulty is probably built in to their karmic experience, that's part of what they need, is to have that, struggle, because somewhere in that is there's going to be incredible learning,
Yeah.
so
Huh. So there's
incredibly long, short answer is everybody has the ability.
yeah, well, so I mean, I'm in Boulder, so there's definitely, I don't know if this is everywhere, like every state across the nation, but for sure in Boulder, there's kind of a resurgence of like psychedelics. And I think it's across the country because mushrooms are getting legalized, or psilocybin, and there's a lot more research on LSD. So do you feel like that is something that opens, like what's your perception of what that is doing? Do you feel like it's a healthy way to access this thing that might otherwise just be shut off because I feel like our culture is not really like, we're not raised to be like, yeah, look at the energy that's in the trees,
We are definitely not. Yeah. I have mixed feelings about that approach. I do think that, at the basic level is that it absolutely does change your basic relationship to consciousness. And so if your purpose is to shift your relationship to consciousness so that you can experience something outside of your mind, then absolutely it's going to work. Like the potential for it to do that is 100% there. My challenge, I think, comes from that just having the ability to have the experience doesn't mean that the experience that you have is going to be useful. So if you start out from a place that's very emotionally disturbed or very upset in a mental way, and you're looking at those things as a way to try and escape that, is you might find that all you've done is tear down the protective, walls in your mind that were actually helping to keep that experience relevant. Where you start out in your, in your inner world is going to determine a lot of what happens in that outer mind or outer body experience. So if you're using substances to try to escape what's in here, it a lot of times does not work, or it works very for a very short period of time. And then the moment the effect of the drug is off is now you're slammed back into this inner world that you haven't made any sense of. You just tried to get away from it. And then that's what creates a lot of that sort of addictive escapism pattern, with drugs or with any substance that, has the ability to do that. So that's number one. I think that you still have to be very responsible for yourself in any kind of energy work or spiritual exploration, or even in recreational drug use. I think you have to be very, very responsible for your own inner experience, because all you're doing is augmenting that with the substance. You're not going to create a different world to live in through the drugs. Is you're going to take whatever's in you into that and do whatever you do with it. So I think that there's just a caution there to be aware of what you're doing and why you're trying to do it.
Right.
But on the other hand, I think there's incredible potential for those substances to aid people in being able to get past some of those barriers in their mind that they haven't been able to do any other way.
Right.
And I see this a lot. What's also, I think, coming up more and more is ketamine assisted psychotherapy, which I know some people who are participating in it, and they're finding it amazing, that it's helping them to, feel things and work through things that they have not been able to do with any other type of therapy. So
yeah, there's a woman here, a neighbor who has a collective here. And it just occurred to me that when you said that, I should really have her on, because I do think they're helping a lot of people just almost like get underneath the like resistance that's sometimes there to feeling, really.
Yeah. And I think that's huge. So there's huge potential there. It comes down always, I think, to, again, personal responsibility of what are you really doing with it, and are you willing to actually do the inner work of sustaining whatever the changes are, or the perspective work, or the emotional releasing, like whatever comes up in that therapy or in those experiences where you're like, oh, I get it now. Like, here's where I've been, messing things up, or here's where I'm getting stuck. Like, are you willing to change that?
Right.
Because if you're not, it doesn't matter how many drugs you do. It doesn't matter how much therapy you do. It doesn't matter how much you talk to spirit. Like it doesn't matter if you don't have the personal sense of these energies are yours to work with. Like this life
Mm.
is yours to work with. We're not at the mercy of it. We're here to do something with it. So all of those energies are support, but they can't do it for you. Like there's no such thing as that being done for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, this kind of goes into what I was thinking about, is that you've mentioned this being something that is teachable, right? Like that, have you thought about teaching? Like everything you just said, I'm like that, I could see that being like a part of a workshop or a lecture. So have you thought about like, have you thought about teaching it? And if you have, like, how would you have like a structure that you could imagine it being something that could be teachable?
Yeah. So my joke always is that spirit really does direct our lives for us. So, I
As
just
much
go
as
where,
we might resist and fight. Like,
I go where I'm told to go. That's
mhm.
that's my joke. And when something comes up over and over again in front of me, then I pay attention because I know that's not random people, saying it. So you're probably the fourth or fifth person in the last month or so who said, "Are you going to teach this?"
Uh-huh.
I'm like, I absolutely think that definitely the tools for accessing this type of world or this type of work is teachable. I myself have not worked out the full methodology of how I would teach it, but I know there are people who teach mediumship classes. Like there are schools that do
Mhm.
this type of thing. I don't know how they do it. That's the funny thing, is because I'm like I'm completely self-taught, or I've never had formal real education or training, really, short of Reiki trainings and things like that. But to actually teach the methodology is something that I'm currently working on, because it has been brought to my attention several times that people want. They keep asking me if I'm going to teach, so I'm like, well, I guess I'll teach if that's what people are looking for. But I do think that there has to be a sort of structure, with an understanding that the structure can only take you so far. Like
Mhm.
the exercises or whatever I can teach can only take you so far, and it's really going to be really guidelines or guideposts for you to do a lot of that inner exploration yourself. Because again, your way of getting into that connection is not going to be the same as mine. So it doesn't make any sense for me to try to teach you how to be empathic if that's not naturally how you are. It doesn't make any sense for me to try and teach you to channel the way I channel if that's not the way that you hear. So there's that, where I think there needs to be a lot of openness for there to be variability in the experience, but that the exercises or that the training is still very relevant to, again, help those experiences come about, or to work with those important mental and emotional awareness points that help to unlock that experience in you, because that's all it is. It's just training yourself to figure out how you already interact with that energy, because we
Mhm.
all do, but you have to know how you do it. So it's like me for years and years saying, like, I want it to look like this,
Mhm.
and so was completely shocked when it turned out that the way I do it is completely different
Yeah,
from the way that I thought that it was going
totally.
to be.
I remember wishing that I could like walk into a treatment room and it would just be like, I know and I see, like coming from outside of myself. And I'm like, no, actually, like I need to be able to feel into myself. It's not going to come from like out here. And I'm still like, do I trust what it's about trusting it too. We learn to like
Absolutely.
ignore those things most of the time.
Yeah, or it
Like, yeah.
becomes scary,
Mhm.
and I think it goes back to a question you asked me however long ago, about if there's ever a time when I don't say
Mhm.
what comes to me. And the answer is yes, generally for two different reasons. One is sometimes they actually tell me not to.
Oh, interesting. Mm.
So like I'll be feeling something, or like I'm very, very clear that I know something is going on, and they'll say, don't say it.
Huh.
I'll be like, what? They're like, don't say it. They're like, say this to them, say this to them, do not say that.
Huh.
So sometimes, again, the necessity, and usually it's very sensitive information when that's happening. And so it's important that I don't rip off that kind of
Right.
veil of security for them, or that it's important that they say it to me first, or,
Like
whatever it is.
like it's
But
just not in service of their like greater healing. Like it's not
exactly. But
knowing
knowing
it's not.
it
Mhm.
for me becomes important, because then
Mhm.
what I'm saying to them and how I'm saying it to them makes sense for that
Mhm.
inner perspective. So occasionally, and it doesn't happen often, but occasionally it will come up where something is there and they're like, don't say it. They're like, leave it
So
alone
interesting.
and just go
Yeah.
this other way. The other times that happen is almost the opposite. It's where I am doubting
Mhm.
that, what I'm getting is accurate, or I'm like, there's no freaking way. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so, like, I'm afraid to say it because, again, I don't want it to be one of those moments where people just look at me like I've got six heads and they're like, why would you? They're like, I don't understand.
Mhm.
So sometimes I hesitate to say things for those reasons. And generally speaking, when that is the case, is it comes back to me in that same session that the thing that I was hesitating on is exactly correct.
Mhm.
And that it's like almost thrown in my face, like, why didn't you just say it? You dummy. This happened fairly recently, actually, with a client. First time that I had ever sat with her, had never met her before. It was, I don't know, I think I don't even remember who referred her to me. I can't remember. Like a friend of a friend, like, referred this person to me, and it was about fertility things. So, interesting for you, someone who's
Mhm.
been trying to get pregnant and has been having a hard time. And generally speaking, when I know I'm going to sit with someone, is the day before or earlier in the day of, is I'll sit and kind of meditate on them and
Mhm.
just put myself kind of in that space of being, prepared, so that there is not a lot. So it takes me less time when I'm actually with them, because I feel like I've already got like a synergy. So I was meditating on her, and I'm asking, of course, because I know that fertility is going to be one of the things. And very, very clearly, they're showing me her like internal anatomy, and they're like, she's got a problem on this side. They're like, the tube is broken, the tube is collapsed. I'm
Mhm.
like, what? I'm like, that's so weird. They're like this whole side, the whole side of this side of her pelvis is off, but the tube is collapsed, and
Huh.
this is one of her big problems. And I'm like, no way. I'm like, that's so weird. Like, that's so uncommon. Like, that can't possibly be, like, whatever. So, I'm not completely like discounting it to be true, but I'm like, I don't know. Like, that sounds a little far out. So anyway, so I'm sitting with her and getting started, whatever. And again, feeling her body, and I can feel the side of her pelvis that has like no
Wow.
energy in it, and where there's a
Mhm.
problem and all of this. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, well, there's definitely a problem structurally on this side. I'm like, it's part of your pelvic alignment, but it's also like the ovary on that side, like that whole side is kind of messed up. And she says to me, oh, she's like, I know, on that side, I have a collapsed tube. And I'm like,
Wow. You're like, why
I'm
didn't
like,
I say it?
darn. I'm like, why didn't I just say it? Because it would have been such a great moment where she would have been like, holy
Right.
shit, she's the real deal. And, whatever. But, and I did like jokingly say to her, I'm like, my God, I'm like, I knew that. Like, I knew that from, whatever. And I'm usually very honest about it when I'm doing that, where I'm like, shit, like I knew that. And,
Mhm.
so,
Well, I know you're
it's,
the real deal and I would vouch for you. I mean, I do. I like refer all of my friends to you. I don't know if they actually call you, but I know that everybody who's listening is gonna want a reading. So do you actually have a website or is it just word of mouth?
I
Like your
don't.
Mhm.
It's been word of mouth since I began, because my way of saying it is I've always been a little bit of a scaredy cat about about public exposure.
You know that
And
I
and I
knew
but I
that,
do
and
think,
that's why I was like, Veronica.
I know. So this is a big deal for me that I'm
I
even
know.
that I'm even doing this. But I do think it's just an important thing that I want to, put out there for anyone who does this kind of work, or who wants to get into doing this type of practice for themselves, or for anyone, is
Mhm.
that, doubt is maybe a constant companion. It's a constant companion of mine. Like, there's
Mhm.
never a moment where there's not a part of me that's like, are you sure you know what you're doing? Like, are you sure you want to are you sure you want to do this?
Mhm.
And the answer always is yes, is there's a much bigger part of me that absolutely wants to do what I can. And one of my first big teachings from my guides that they used to say to me before every session, because I would get so anxious where it's like I almost couldn't talk because
Mhm.
I was so like, oh my God, like what if I get this wrong and make a mess of this, and I really want to be good at this, and all of that. And what they would say to me before every session is they would say, calm down. It is not your job to be right. It is your
Wow.
job to give the information as it comes. It is your job to give the message. It's
Mhm.
not up to you whether you're right. So just let it go. It's not your job. And that's stuck with me as the most important thing now when I have those moments of hesitation where like I'm afraid to say something or I'm not sure how it's going to be received, is I'll often say like, here it is. Like, I'm not 100% on this, but here it is, and let it be, whatever it is. But there's that hesitation around making mistakes or that you somehow have to be 100% accurate to be legitimate is ridiculous.
Mhm.
It's just ridiculous because, we're working with an abstract language. We're not necessarily working with direct concrete things. Is you're working off of whatever that flow of information, whatever that flow of energy is. And it can be sometimes our interpretation, it can be sometimes just not understanding the way the other person needs to hear it. There's so many factors that go into that language.
Mhm.
But I really want to put that out there that anyone who's doing this, if you continue to have doubt or you feel like you make mistakes, is that does not delegitimize
Yeah.
what you do. It just means that maybe there's a place to practice a little bit more, to work on confidence and trust and all of that. um, but that's part of the reality, is just having that part of your mind that might always be doubting. And personally, I think it makes me better at what I do because it reminds me to go back into that really open place where I'm in service to the
Mhm.
person in front of me. And I really do think that my job is not to have all the right answers for them, but my job is to give them the best that I can give them.
Mhm.
And if that's what I'm trying to do, then whatever comes out is always better than what I expect it to be. But I do laugh that often, I say I'm always shocked when I'm right.
Well, I will say that like my working with you has been hugely impactful. I mean, it was like 6 or 7 years ago that we came in, and I came in with Dory, my husband, and you said like you would be so much happier in Colorado. And I remember being like, all right, moving to Colorado. Like it was like I knew it, I knew that that was right. I think we were just like, there were so many reasons to not do it. And as soon as you said it, it almost like it act for me, whenever I have a reading with you, it tends to like activate what I already kind of know to be true, but maybe, don't want to see or don't trust. Like a lot of it has to do with trusting myself and trusting the path and trusting my instincts and like not feeling like I have to get everything done and right. And as a chronic overachiever, it's like sometimes it's just like rest and wait and trust the process. So I'm really
Yeah.
grateful to you, so thank you.
Yeah, but that's hugely important, to the
Mm-hmm.
question of, is this possible for everybody? And the answer is yes, because again, that's often what a reading actually does for people, is that it's not necessarily telling them something that they didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's true, but it's usually just clarifying for them what they already know, and giving them the ability to grab onto it and trust it and act on it, where when it was just them and themselves, they're doing that whole same mental thing that I just described of being like, are you sure? Like, maybe you're crazy. Like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. It sounds like a terrible idea. Like doing all of that. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's exactly what you said, is often this type of intuitive work is just to help the person in front of me or the person in front of whoever's doing the work to realize what they already know and expand upon it or to move on it.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm always so happy to hear that, because, again, the agreement I made with my guides early on, as I said, because this makes me, or especially in the beginning, made me so nervous, is I was like, I'm only going to do this if it's useful to people. I'm like, I'm only doing this as long as it's useful. So don't send me people that are, that are not mine to help. Like, I don't want to
Right.
weed through,
Or like you
you
want you to be
know,
like a party trick or something like.
Well, exactly that.
Yeah.
And that's where, again, I have this like aversion to a lot of labels and things like that, because I don't want to be pigeonholed as this is what to expect. And, you
Yeah.
know, the expectation is that I'm going to give you whatever I can, but it depends on what you're looking for. It depends on, you know, what I can do, what I can't do. You know, it depends on a lot of things, what actually happens in a session. And I usually say we can plan on what we're going to do to start, but once we start, it's not up to me.
Yeah.
They decide what we do.
I do have one more question if you're okay with that. And this is
No,
one of those things.
I have time. She's
Okay.
occupied.
Yeah. So I'm going to be really just aware of and respectful of your yes or no on this. So don't feel like obligated but I know the women are going to be like chomping at the bit. So do you feel like there is like, in terms of fertility, and not necessarily for you to like go into a state of where you're receiving, but do you feel like there's like a collective message or understanding in terms of what women need to hear in terms of fertility? And again, if this feels like, I didn't ask you to come on to like work, so if this feels like, nope, I'm not going to do that, well, we could just end it. So that's totally fine too.
Yeah. I would say that the really overarching, sort of message is that fertility is not a biological equation. It's an environment. And that the environment is not just your physical body, but it is your spiritual self. It's the energy fields all around you that are interacting with the energy fields of that potential child. So the groundwork that you do to try and make that environment really vibrant and healthy and open is important, but try not to get focused on the equation aspect of it, that if I do X, Y, and Z, it's going to result this way. Is that it's much more about where is the openness and where is the ability to support life coming through you. And if that's what you're looking for, is how to support energy or life coming through you, then you might look at your fertility process differently, that there's what you can do for your body, but there's also making space in your life. There's also making space in your mind. There's also making space in your relationships often, that things maybe are not going to be the way that, and everything doesn't fit exactly the way that you want it to, but you actually have to rearrange the way that you're living your life in order for that life to fit in what you already have happening. So to think of your fertility not as an equation, but as an ecosystem or as an environment that is so big and that you are so big. This is one of the biggest challenges, is that when you start to treat your body as though it is something that is just biological, is you limit it so much and you make it small. And fertility and birthing and mothering and all of that is huge. It's so much bigger than us as individuals. And that's maybe our biggest struggle, is realizing that it's bigger than us as an individual, that process. And the more you can open to the bigness of that and let it carry you instead of you trying to make it work, that creates a different relationship, a different energy flow. But that's kind of the way they give it to me in the broadest sense. Is to start with that. And I think a lot of women that you work with are going to need that part that says you have to actually rearrange your life. It's not just trying to rearrange your body, it's actually rearranging your life for that process to feel more easeful, and for there to be space, for there to be real space for that life to come in and be a part of what you have. So it's not a, it's not a me or you, it's a, it's a much bigger thing.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Yeah.
When you're in the middle of it, is like, I am one of those people that generally think that if I'm doing something, it can't be that big of a deal, because I just, don't think of myself as someone who's that out of the ordinary. So whatever I do is I tend to be like, I don't know, I'm just doing what's in front of me. And, it's always comes as a little bit of a shock when people say like, oh, you're actually really good at this, or,
Mhm.
it's surprising that you're as good at this as you are. And I usually get a lot of like, you're so young, like,
Yeah.
be doing what you're
Well,
doing.
that's what one of the first questions that you kind of answered was like, I think a lot of people, a lot of children, I do think naturally are open to this, energy. And if their family members are like, oh, like that's so weird, or no, that's not true, that can't be true, or like, kind of like poo-poo it or dismiss it or are scared of it, then it gets shut down. So I think that it was just kind of natural for you, like, yeah, this is what some people do, and it was okay, is probably, I would imagine, like a big part of like why you could access this from such a young age, as opposed to it being something like, I think I could do this. It's like, yeah, of course you can.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe the
Yeah.
more
So
people that, I just feel like the more people that do this and the more people that know it's possible, and then, the more healthy of a system we could be, of like a society
right.
we could be, of people
Yeah.
who are open.
And I do a lot of telling people, because I get that a lot, where the people come in who have had a lot of experiences when they were young, and they're like, oh yeah, I used to like see and hear and do all this stuff, and it scared me. So like I shut it down. And then sometimes it actually comes back later in life, and they're like, I don't want it to. And I'm like, well, it's not the same. Like, it's not the same as what was happening when you were younger.
Right.
But there's also no pressure. That's the other thing, is that there's sort of this weird assumption, I think, that if you have this kind of skill, or you have this kind of natural ability, that you have to do something with it, that like that has to be the center of your life, or that you have to use it to help people, or that you have to do this, you have to do that. And you don't have to do anything. Like that's, I say that to people a lot too. I'm like, it's for you. Like it's part of who you are. It's not a job description.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be if that's really what you want, but it's not an occupation that you sign up for. It's part of who you are. So whether you choose to do it as work, either for, financial exchange or service, or however you want to do it, or you choose just to have it to be something that's yours, that you actually know how to use,
Mm.
realistically, or to take you somewhere deep in yourself, like it's all the same. Like there's no requirement that if you are sensitive energetically, or that you're empathic, or that you're psychic, or that you're a medium, like you don't have to do it for anybody. It's not a requirement. But you should know about it for yourself, how it works for you, how it works with you, how it's actually benefiting your life. Because it is a gift. It is a way of being in the world that not everybody immediately experiences. And as much as I joke and say, like, again, nobody would choose the superpower of someone walks into a room and you get their headache. Like, like that part of it sounds stupid. Like, so when people
Right.
say, I wish I could do what you could do, I'm like, really? Like, you want
Or
that
like you
part?
ever have like explosive diarrhea, like, oh, I know your problem is.
Thankfully not. I don't get the diarrhea, but I will be like, you got gut stuff. Like if it's happening, I'm like, intestines.
Yeah.
Um, so there's no like, there's no pressure. That's the
Yeah.
thing, is, and even with that kind of weirdness of how, it is to be empathic, is I wouldn't trade it.
Mm.
I wouldn't trade it to have an experience where somehow I don't feel that deeply, or where I don't feel people the way that I feel them, because there is something I think that's very special when you're empathic about feeling someone from a heart place, instead of trying to interpret them just from up here, or
Mm.
being scared to have that feeling sense of them.
Yeah.
When you're empathic, again, you have to almost shove them away
Mm.
to not have that. But when you're really aware of it, and I don't like the word in control of it, but it kind of works. But when you're very centered in it, and you kind of know those boundaries, and you know how to be, navigating that energy space that is shared, is there something really, I think, wonderful about that, is to be able to feel each other from a heart place. And
Mm.
exactly as you're saying, that the more people who are open on any level to feeling the world, or being in the world like that, not just from up here, not needing to know all the answers, but being able to actually feel, and being able to actually know that, that there is guidance going on, that there's guidance going on through you, that you actually do know what's good for you, and that
Mm.
there actually is, a plan somewhere in all of this,
Mhm.
that we might not be aware of, but we're part of it. And what we do matters in that plan. It's not like a set of railroad tracks that, are just set and they're just going to go and there's nothing you can do. It's that you are rerouting those railroad tracks every single day, every single
Mhm.
moment, and that your railroad tracks are influencing the railroad tracks of everyone around you. So the more open you become, you actually create opportunity for openness for maybe people halfway across the globe, and you have no idea that that's what you're doing, but you are.
Yeah.
So there's a real beauty in that way of being, whether you have the skill to be able to pull lottery numbers out of the air, or you
Mhm.
are able to predict the future or not, or you see ghosts, or
Yeah.
all of that doesn't matter, right? The core of this kind of work is that feeling,
Yeah.
that there is something more than just what our senses, external senses, are doing.
Yeah.
And when you have that deeper sense, then you actually feel yourself and feel your reality in the world is a very different thing. And that, I think, is maybe what we're all secretly searching for when we say we want to be able to have those psychic powers, or we want to be able to have that, is we want to have that feeling of really belonging in ourselves and really feeling like we belong in this world, and that it makes sense to us, and that there is a coherence,
Mm.
that we have an impact, right? We want to feel that.
It's so
And right
interesting.
now, I think that's one of our big things, is that a lot of people don't feel like it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what I do. The world's going where it's going,
Well, it's
and
interesting. You talk about this gift kind of as kind of the same way I think about. I mean, I don't use the word infertility, but the way I see infertility as a symptom, it's almost like you see this gift of like, it has to be in service of you. It must be in service of you. And if we see it that way, like if we see infertility as somehow in service of us learning something or accessing something or shifting something in our life, like you said, to make space for it, it's like it's for us on this bigger path. So I really love that. Yeah.
yeah, every everything is interconnected. So every conversation is really the same conversation. When you get here, it's just where you're entering in from. So, you know, that's I don't know. I think that's maybe my last thought, is just wherever you're entering in from, and it doesn't have to even be from this realm of energy work, is it can be through, whatever it is that you love, whether it's your physical self, your fertility, whether it's through other gifts that you have, other skills that you have that maybe you always thought of just being your occupation or what you do to make money, or a hobby that you have on the side. Like, these are all inroads in to that experience that says that what I do matters.
Mm.
And that it matters in this big picture, that I'm not just doing things to try and keep surviving, but that what I'm doing is actually feeding um, this much bigger relationship and this much bigger plan, right? That I'm part of that. Um, God works through us. The divine works through us. Spirit works through us. So all of that, conversation is not spirit talking to itself. It doesn't need to have that conversation. It's it's for us to embody it. It's for us to live it. And the
Yeah.
more we do that, then our lives do move in a different pattern, and we do find a greater ease, and we do find greater fulfillment in what we actually have. And maybe we have a little bit less of that wishing that we had something else, because what we have is actually now a reflection of who we are, instead of us having no idea who we are and just doing whatever it is that we think we have to do to not starve.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
So that's the hope, is that this is the direction that the world is going. And the more people who start to treat themselves that way in any little version, is that it all facilitates that. It just raises vibration, raises everybody to a place where there's more opportunity for us to be ourselves, be
yeah.
ourselves better, be ourselves more to our potential. I don't know. It
Well,
goes
that was
on and on,
magic. No,
doesn't it?
that was like pure magic. So thank you so much. I feel like I know that, I mean, that resonates with me, and I have a feeling it will resonate deeply with the listeners. So thank you, Veronica, for coming on. It's so good
You're
to see
very,
you.
you're
Yeah,
very welcome. I'm actually really, really proud of myself for
you did
for agreeing.
it. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more like it, be sure to subscribe, and I hope you'll rate and review as well. To learn more about how to connect with and explore your fertility, visit wisdomofthewomb.online.com and learn more about my fertility enhancing 12-week program at fertilelikeamother.com. Thanks so much for joining.